Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on this session of our Spring Online School. My name's Jessica and I am a project officer at the CPD unit at Cardiff University. Just a few housekeeping bits. We are all still working from home, so if there are any interruptions from pets, children or poor Wi-Fi connections, then please bear with us. We are also recording this session and it will be available on our YouTube channel after the event. Just a reminder to pop any questions that you might have during the session in the Q&A box below. We'll also be making use of Mentimeter during the session, so if you do have a second device, a phone to hand, then that's great. It's just left for me now to hand over to your two wonderful presenters for this session, Delyth Morris and Marianne Hilliar. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone.
Hello everyone. So today we're going to be talking about publishing a systematic review, and I'll start sharing my screen so you can see the presentation, but we're going to jump straight in to a Mentimeter quiz to find out a little bit about who you are, what your area of interest in and what your experience is of publishing, first of all, but also whether you've conducted a systematic review. So what we'd like to ask you is, can you tell us a little bit about you and your research or publishing experience? So if you could use your mobile phone to jump onto the website menti.com. Once you open up that site, you can use the code 49232489. Hopefully you can see that on the screen to answer our question.
While you fill those questions out so we get to know a little bit more about you, yeah, just talk about what we're really going to go through today. So we're interested to know what your areas of research are, if you've done systematic reviews before, if you've published them before. So obviously sometimes people do them as students. So yeah, we're just a little bit interested to know that. So if we can tailor the session a little bit more to what it is you're interested in. But yeah, the content really of the session today is going to be talking through publishing a systematic review. Now, Marianne and I are librarians, so we definitely do come at it with more of an angle of thinking about kind of your search strategy and stuff like that for the systematic review, but we'll touch on all elements if we can. I know we've had some pre-submitted questions in advance, which are a little bit more to do with the mechanics of doing a systematic review, which isn't necessarily what we're going to be covering today. However, that was covered in one of these Spring School sessions last year, so we do have a link out to that. Our colleague Marla ran that session, so if you would like to know a bit more just about the process of doing a systematic review, then by all means go back and watch that, and we've got a link to that at the end of our presentation. And then once we've talked specifically about systematic reviews, we will move on then to just talking about publishing in general, so thinking about ways that how to choose a journal to publish in, how to kind of construct an abstract, how to promote your publication, maybe on Twitter or on social media after. So quite a wide spectrum of things to cover in the next kind of 45 minutes or so before we go to questions, but hopefully that's the type of thing that you were expecting. So it looks like we've had some feedback coming in, just having a look at that now.
Well, yeah.
Okay, should have probably said Marianne and I are medical subject librarians, so we definitely are coming at it from a medical perspective, like it looks like a lot of you are.
Yeah, we've got translator as well, specialising in medicine, digital supply chain management in logistics, and AI work. Other than that, everybody else is in healthcare or medicine.
So certainly, obviously, systematic reviews are most popular in that field, but you'll find they're starting to pop up everywhere now. So policy making, a lot of social science. So I'm working on one at the moment with to do with homelessness. I think even subjects like business and geography and things like that are starting to see the benefit of running systematic reviews too.
Great, thanks. So we'll go on to the next quiz question, which is we want to find out whether you've published work in a journal already in your experience. So this should just be a quick yes or no answer, so we get a sense of who else is in the room with us. Everybody with us on that one. I can see we've got 20 people on the page. Can't see the answers.
Yeah, I think if we go to the next slide, would you get answers then?
Let's see.
Maybe?
No.
No. Oh. Is it hide results? Yeah.
Yeah, they've gone.
Oh.
Let me just go to the website and I'll just have a look. Not getting the answers showing there either. Strange. Okay, don't know how to handle that one.
Perils of doing things live.
And we also wanted to get a sense of whether you've done a systematic review. So I don't know if the same thing's going to happen there.
If it does, perhaps we can put it in the chat instead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, Marianne, do you want me to pop it in a quick poll for you instead?
That would be lovely.
Oh, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, so the previous question or this? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Have you published work in a journal?
Okay, somebody's saying that they'd like to learn how to do a systematic review as they read a lot of research. I'm not sure if that means read a lot of research about systematic reviews or just systematic reviews in general. So we'll certainly talk through some kind of the pre-publication process of doing a systematic review and some of the things that are expected when you come to publish a systematic review. But like I kind of mentioned earlier, If you want to learn more about all of the processes and the expectations of doing a systematic review, that session that Marla did last year, which is up on YouTube, that would be really useful to go back and look at. Okay, so that's quite an interesting split.
So those of you who have, perhaps we'll be drawing on your experience as well, but maybe highlighting some things that you might not have considered, or would be interested in hearing what you've got to say. And then also, yeah, for early career researchers or people who haven't published yet, hopefully all of our content's going to be relevant for you. So our next question, and I don't know if
yeah, maybe Jess, if
or
you
Claire could do another poll. Have you done a systematic review?
Yeah, and certainly, so we have the majority of people here have published in a journal, and what Marianne's going to talk about a bit later is going to be in relation to kind of publishing in general, not specifically about systematic reviews. So that should be useful across the board, hopefully, for those of you that have published or are thinking about publishing.
And when we say, have you done a systematic review, have you been involved?
Yeah, because you could have been involved at any part of the process.
Yeah, we were going to ask that as part of our next. Okay.
Okay.
More
Okay.
happened. Okay, so that's interesting. And then our last question for now, if you have published a systematic review, were you the first author, the corresponding author, or as member of the team? So we'd be interested in your role that you took while you were working on your systematic review.
Yeah, and maybe Marianne and I can talk about what we've done. So certainly I've been involved in several systematic reviews as a member of the team. So we are brought in quite a bit to do the searching. Sometimes we do a little bit of the sifting and the data extraction as well, but the majority of time as librarians, we're assisting or doing the searching. I have actually done one where I was the corresponding author as well, but it was a library-related systematic review, so more in my field, really. And I'm sure Marianne's very similar to me, to kind of all the librarians on our team. We've all been co-authored as team members on plenty of reviews.
Okay, so there's a 50-50 split there. We haven't had all the answers in yet, but some as the corresponding author and yes as a member of team. I think we'll close that now and move on. Yeah. So we've got a little sense of who's with us, and hopefully you'll find the areas of our presentation interesting and stimulating for areas you might not have covered before, things you hadn't thought of. Okay.
Great. So if you wouldn't mind stop and sharing your screen, Marianne, and then I'll share mine. Okay, so we wanted to begin by talking to you about so the systematic review process. Even before you're ready to publish your actual systematic review, there's a step before it that it would be really good to get published as well. So kind of pre-publication of the review, it would be good practice to start thinking about publishing what's called your protocol. So for those of you who've done a systematic review, perhaps you've already done this. It's not 100% done across the board, but it is the best gold standard really to do it. So you publish a document, which is a protocol, which just talks through what it is you're intending on doing. So the types of things, we'll talk about the types of things that you'll include within your protocol. But basically the purpose of it is to be transparent about the work you're doing, limit the possibility of study bias, make it reproducible, allow peer review of the planned methods and use clear language, or you should use clear language so that someone who isn't an expert in the subject area should be able to understand it. So the purpose really of doing this alongside those things, it's really good before you do a systematic review to have a clear idea of what it is you're trying to achieve from it. A really clear, what we call inclusion and exclusion criteria. Marianne and I previously have been involved in reviews where protocols haven't been done, or they've been done and not necessarily been adhered to. And we can tell you from experience that that always leads to complications, because you try and take it down a route, or the team try and take it down a route that it wasn't necessarily intended to do in the first place. And then it starts becoming a bigger project, or it's not actually answering what you intended to set out to do with it. So this really defined protocol can be really important at this point. And if you've got it in writing and if you've got it published, then it's a really clear stamp of what it is you're setting out to actually do and achieve by doing that review.
Also letting other people know what you're working on. So if somebody else is interested in doing a systematic review in that area, they wouldn't want to duplicate the work that's currently being done and published in a protocol. So
absolutely. If you think about, like, if you're doing a review, and systematic reviews are a lot of work, and if you think about, you've gone through all of that work, you've done it all, you're ready to publish, and somebody pips you to the post and publishes something on the exact same topic, that's kind of one of the purposes of doing a protocol, is that you can do a search of protocols to see if somebody is already working on this topic. And if you're doing a systematic review with a health related outcome, which the majority, as we've seen, of us here today would be doing, then you can register your protocol on the database Prospero. So it is basically just a database of protocols that have been registered. So that's a really useful place to search before you do your review to see if somebody else is doing a similar one. And it's also a good place for you to publish, as best practice, publish your protocol. So there's kind of numerous reasons why it's useful to develop a protocol. And some of you might have already done it, so you might want to put in the chat if you've already worked on this type of thing, and it'll be interesting to know if you have published them on Prospero yourselves. But the type of expectation that you usually see in your protocol. So I mentioned earlier the inclusion and exclusion criteria, and certainly from Marianne and I's perspective, and from your librarian's perspective, if they're involved in doing the search, this is really important, because this is where, if you don't have this defined before you're doing your review, this is where it can start getting complicated. So it's really good to define this stuff from the off. So thinking about types of participant. So when you're talking about that, we're potentially talking about the age ranges of people, or what demographic they're in. So as much detail as is relevant to put in there. The types of intervention and comparison. So you might have come across previously a PICO structure where you talk about the participants, intervention, comparison, outcome. Now, this doesn't always fit for all questions. It's very good for clinical related questions, but certainly if you're looking at something more qualitative, for example, it's not the best structure to use. But if you are using or you're looking at an intervention, it's good to refer to it here. What is it you're interested in looking at? The types of outcome measures. It's a bit of a tricky one, this, because you don't always know what the outcome's going to be. But if you can certainly have a think about what kind of outcomes and what kind of expectations you have of what you're going to find. Will you limit to certain study designs? So do you just want to look at randomized controlled trials, cohort studies, qualitative literature, quantitative literature? What if there isn't sufficient information to exclude? So that's a good one. So if you're looking at the full text of an article, once you found it, and there isn't enough information in there to say, for example, you're interested in the age range 18 to 25, and actually it doesn't give you the age range, say for example it just says young adult, what are you going to do in those circumstances? Is that a paper that you're going to use, or is that a paper that you're going to exclude because they haven't been explicit about what age range they're looking at? How many reviewers will be sifting for eligible studies? So if you're doing a systematic review, you should have at least 2 or more reviewers doing that initial sift. If you just have one reviewer, then you're getting into the realms of potentially having bias. So that can be part of your inclusion and exclusion criteria. You'll also, hopefully, within your protocol, want to include your search methods. Who will be undertaking the search? So if you're working in a team, is there a librarian involved? Or sometimes people get students to do this for them. What databases will be searched? And we'll talk, I'll show you some examples in just a sec of some publications where they've been really clear and explicit about these methods, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad, but we'll have a look at some examples. Are you going to look at unpublished and grey literature, or are you just going to focus on published literature? So 9 times out of 10, the grey literature and the unpublished literature that you're going to find, certainly if you're looking at clinical topics, is not going to contain enough information for you to go do a good critical appraisal of it, or even a data extraction, to be honest. So a lot of the time, Marianne and I think would say that it's probably, you're not going to find that much in grey literature. However, having said that, there are certain areas such as public health where this is going to come into its own, and Marianne does a lot with public health, so she might want to talk about that a little bit more. Or certainly, like I mentioned earlier, policy. So I've worked on some things for the European Union on policy where grey literature becomes really important there. I think the majority of people we had with us would be more on the clinical side, but yeah, it very much depends on what kind of subject you're working on. Is there anything else you wanted to say there, Marianne?
No, that's okay. There was a question that came in about limits. Sorry, slightly off topic.
No, that's fine.
In your first area where you were talking about the inclusion and exclusion criteria, somebody had asked about the limits.
Okay.
And I just said that they can be applied according to the inclusion and exclusion criteria, and they sort of allow you to manage and ring fence the amount of literature that you're actually dealing with so that it's relevant. So
yeah, so your limits might be, so for example, you might look at human studies, not animal, or vice versa. They might be a certain date range, although if you are going to go down that route, you need to have a good reason why you're doing that. So for example, whatever your research area is, if you're saying I'm only going to look at literature from this date, you have to have a good reason why. So that could be that there is a review that's already been done, which was done on this date, so you're only going to review the literature that was published since that review. Alternatively, it might be that something really significant, or there was this, a seminal paper, or a way that treatment changed or the intervention changed at a particular point in time, in which case any literature prior to that isn't going to be potentially relevant to current circumstances. So that's the type of information that you put into the protocol.
Yes. What's in
yeah,
the
sorry?
scope. They've just responded, yeah, it's confirming that it's what's within the scope of the search, which is a good way to define it. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So I mentioned date limits there and justification, so that's kind of covered. And also, are you going to do a rerun of the search pre-publication? So sometimes systematic reviews can, they can be numerous years before you actually are ready to publish them, because depending on how much data you've got to work through. So a lot of the time, if it's been a significant period since you ran the search to the point of publication, you might want to write into the protocol that you're actually going to do a rerun of the search. So you rerun all of the searches you did from the date where you last did it to now, and you see if there's been anything new that's been published. We'll talk a little bit about or perhaps, I can't remember if we are actually going to talk about it, but once you've done your searching, you should really keep a clear record of the searches that you've done, the database that you've done them in, the date that you've done them. So part of doing a systematic review is all about really being transparent about your methods. And there is potential, and I have been contacted myself after having done reviews of people saying, why did you use this term and not this term? Or why wasn't this paper picked up and included within your review? And 9 times out of 10, the reason that you haven't picked it up if you've done a good comprehensive search is because it was published after the date that you initially ran the search. So it might have been published before you go on to publish your review, but it was published after you ran the search. So if you have kept a good record of when you ran the searches, you've got really clear justification for responding to that person to say, well, this is why. But if you're doing a really comprehensive review, then you might want to consider rerunning the search, or something which you can do is to set alerts, that's the word I'm looking for, in the databases. So you can do your search in a database and then ask it every week, every 2 weeks, every month, whatever it is, to run the search and to send you any results via email. So you can just keep on top of any new literature being published all the time. And then finally, in your protocol, you'll probably also want to talk about data extraction and synthesis. So how references will be downloaded into a reference management software. So I think we had a question come in advance about managing the results. We would suggest using a reference management software. In Cardiff University, we recommend EndNote, but there are various other platforms out there, Mendeley, Zotero. There are also other platforms, the names of them escape me at the minute, Marianne, I don't know if you can help me, but they're designed to help you to do the systematic review. Is it Epi Reviewer? Is that one of them?
Epi Reviewer.
There's a few others as well.
And just to go back as well, the couple of reference managers that you mentioned, Zotero and Mendeley, are open source, so they're free to use.
Good point.
But yeah. Carry on, sorry, Della.
Okay. So there's other pieces of software which are designed to assist with numerous reviewers doing the sifting. So we don't have access to those in Cardiff University. That's because they are well, we haven't really looked into how much it would cost to get like a site license for them, but we feel at the moment anyway, like we can do everything we need to do with EndNote, really. But that's not to say you wouldn't want to look into them, and whatever institution you're in, they might have access to it, so maybe have a chat with your librarian about it.
The reference managers that Delyth has mentioned enable you to add codes into your references on the management software, so it enables you to track back anything that you've annotated or you've coded or tagged. So that should be sufficient. We've always found that sufficient in our experience. I've even seen other people using Excel. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but those are the options really, aren't they? Yeah, like Marianne says, most of them have got a field somewhere where you can add an annotation, which is really important for when you do the full text sift of a systematic review. So you can say excluded because, and keep a note of why you've done that. How will the data be extracted? Will assessment of risk of bias be carried out? How will the treatment effect be measured? Will meta-analysis be undertaken? I was actually helping out with a systematic review course earlier in the week, and actually a lot of the delegates at that weren't aware that meta-analysis is done after doing a systematic review. So you shouldn't really do a meta-analysis unless you've done a systematic review, because your meta-analysis should be based on all of the literature that is available out there. So yeah. Okay, yeah, when submitting your systematic review, so the standard and the quality of the search strategy can affect your chances of publication. So we talked a bit about the search earlier. We're not going to go through the specifics of how to run a search or the expectations of what should be in it, etc. But Marianne and I are librarians, so this is kind of our bread and butter, and it's what we see, you know, on a weekly basis is seeing reviews brought to us from students or from academics, you know, what do you think of this, etc. And we kind of have to give comment on it. What you would be expecting to see when you publish a systematic review within the methodology is appropriate database selection. So that really varies depending on what subject you're looking at, but certainly more than one database. A well-structured search, I should have probably put /searches in there,
So a combination of subject heading and text word searching if you're using databases that have that functionality within them. Include dates searched, like I mentioned earlier, and all of the reasons why. Outline the above in your methodology and include search strategies where possible. While that is all gold standard and should be an expectation of what you include in the methodology, what you'll potentially find, certainly what Marianne and I find, that this isn't always the case in the published literature and the published systematic reviews. So if I'm going to stop sharing that now, and I'm going to show you some examples of published reviews which show some good bits and some bad bits, or certainly some more questionable bits. Let's not say bad. So first of all, what we've got here is a Cochrane review, which many of you might be familiar with. These are absolutely gold standard. They literally leave no stone unturned when they do a Cochrane review. You know, they won't even limit it to English language papers. They have the budget to look at all papers, regardless of language. They include a search method section. They're also really specific. So if I look in the appendices, they include in the appendices their exact searches. So if we have a look, it's taking its time, sorry. So within their appendix, they show the databases that they've searched. So they've searched 1, 2, 3, 4 databases, and they show the exact search strategies that they've run in those databases to find that literature. Now you can see there's a combination of subject heading searching here. There's a combination of text word searching where they're looking in the title and the abstract. They've not applied any limits. They're just looking at all of the literature that's available about that topic area. This is your absolute gold standard expectation. Actually, you can see here they have limited it to human studies. You wouldn't be expected necessarily, if you were publishing a review, to do things to the level that a Cochrane review is done. It's good to follow the practices of what they do, and they do have a Cochrane handbook which talks you through exactly how they do their process, and we have linked out to that at the end of the presentation, so you'll be able to go and have a look at that if you're interested. However, you are still expected, obviously it's a systematic review, you're still expected to follow a clearly defined methodology. So if we take a look, for example, at this systematic review, which was published in 2016, if we look at their methodology, and this isn't about criticising other people's work or anything like that, it's just about knowing how to do a good systematic review, really. So they mention within their methodology that they search PubMed. Now within this, this paper, they do include the searches that they did in PubMed to find the literature. But Marianne and I, and a lot of you are from the medical background, so you are very much likely, I would imagine, aware of PubMed. We would recommend that you use Medline if you've got access to it. Now, as I said, we're not trying to criticise these people's work. It's absolutely possible that whatever institution they work for, they don't have access to Medline. But we would suggest, if you do, certainly in Cardiff University we have it, and NHS Wales, that you use the database Medline rather than PubMed. Reason being, you can structure a much more comprehensive search in Medline than you can in PubMed, which is just more appropriate for a systematic review. Having said that, if this is all they've got access to, personally, I don't believe they can call that a systematic review. Searching one database does not show that you found all of the literature out there on that topic. So if somebody brought this to me, I'd be slightly dubious about this one for those reasons. And then finally, sorry, carry on.
That it would be more appropriate just to say that it was a literature search,
yes,
a review of the literature rather than a systematic review.
Yeah, definitely. You might have even heard of rapid reviews as well. So that might be even something that they could investigate. It was published in 2016, where perhaps that wasn't such a well-known review type, but basically rapid reviews they follow the structure of a systematic review, but they're designed to be done much quicker. So it might be that you only search in one database, or it might be that you apply limits that wouldn't be appropriate to do for a systematic review, etc. And then finally, there's one here, and as we can see, this is from one of the BMJ journals, so it is well respected, and was published, oh, I can't see the date on it now, but I think it was really quite a recent one. It must be because it's about COVID. And we can see they talk about the design of their search here. They search, again, they search in PubMed. These three databases are preprint databases, so that's completely understandable that they've decided to choose to search those, because this is a COVID topic, so a lot of the literature might be preprint at the moment. But if we just scroll down to have a look at their, that's really interesting. So they've called this a systematic review in the title. So this will play into what Marianne will talk about later. They've called this a systematic review in the title, but if we scroll down to their methods, we undertook a rapid systematic review. So actually what they've done is a rapid review. So my criticism of it doesn't stand really, because they've called it a rapid review, but you wouldn't know that unless you looked at it in detail, because they obviously hadn't put that in the title. But basically, they've included their search here. Again, it's a PubMed search, so not 100% sold on it, but it might be all they've got access to. The search itself, I'm a little bit dubious about. So for example, they're obviously looking at it in children, but they've only searched for the term child and infant. Pediatric, surely that should be in there somewhere. Also, we wouldn't usually recommend searching for terms like symptom or signs. Instead, what we would say to do is list specific symptoms or specific signs of this thing. So what I guess I'm trying to get at here is that if your methodology isn't perfect, it's still distinctly possible that you're going to get your review published. However, do you want your review to then be brought to somebody like Marianne or myself or other researchers, other academics, and for them to read it and think, actually, why did they do this? You know, more and more lately, journal peer review editorial boards are asking librarians to be involved in the peer review of systematic reviews. Not across the board by any stretch, but it is becoming more popular. And so there is potential that if you send your review for publication and it gets peer reviewed and there is a librarian involved, it is likely they will pick up these things. And of course, the search is like right at the beginning of the process. So the last thing you want to have to do really is go back and revisit that. So
I just got a question in about the Cochrane reviews and what they are.
Okay. They're basically just gold standard systematic reviews. So the Cochrane collaboration, which you may have heard of, they administer the reviews, so they decide what reviews need to be done. They assemble a team of registered Cochrane reviewers, so whether that's specialists in that area, librarians who are involved. We've got some in Cardiff University in the NHS who do Cochrane reviews, and they follow the most robust gold standard best practice way of doing a review. Is that a good way of describing it, Marianne? Oh, you're on mute.
I've just shared the link as well.
Oh, brilliant, thank you.
To the Cochrane Library, where you'll find the reviews that have been done, and as Della said, they're gold standard. It's an independent organisation that conducts reviews of the literature, as Della said, to an absolute gold standard, and it's kind of the worldwide aspirational model that that they work on.
So with all of that in mind, we thought we'd ask you, so I kind of should pass over to Marianne in just a sec, but we thought we'd ask you, based on what we've talked about here and your understanding of undertaking systematic reviews, how do you think you could ensure your search is robust enough for inclusion in a systematic review? So if you go to menti.com, same as we did earlier, pop that code in, yeah, and we'll see what you think. let me know when you'd like me to stop sharing, Marion.
Yeah. Let's see what's coming in.
There you go. I'll stop sharing now, and then
Thank
you'll be able
you.
to share them into the screen.
Still not coming through. Strange.
Oh, let me log in and see if I can add anything.
Oh, here they come.
I say we use Mentimeter all the time. We don't often have any problems.
No,
with
I
it,
know,
do we?
first time. So we've got some nice ones coming in there for ensuring that your search is robust enough for inclusion in a systematic review. So ask a librarian to peer review your
That's
search.
our big one.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, look at previous studies, check Prospero, take the time to develop.
Look at previous studies is a good one. So if you can find a study, even if it's, I mean, ideally you don't want it to be exactly what you're interested in, because obviously you don't want to replicate what somebody else has done. But if you can find one that's a bit similar or using similar concepts to you, it's absolutely fine to take their search strategy, possibly amend it a little bit, but it's not plagiarism to do that. But the thing we just say is to be very careful about whose search strategy you're using, because as we've kind of evidenced today, not all of them are necessarily best practice. Yeah, so it's a good idea definitely to do that, but just be careful. And you could always take it to a librarian and ask them what their opinion is on it.
And we'd sort of say that that would be the best
Yeah.
method, really, is to get an expert in searching to review your work, and it probably won't take very long for them, you know, to run it past them. You know, what I have to say about that, really, but
yeah, some good things
even
coming in
peer
there.
review is better than
Yeah.
better than not seeking anybody's advice, really.
Yeah,
and
and
even between the two of us, when we've been
Yeah.
reviewing things, we've pulled out something that might have just slipped through the net. So it's not a great criticism when something's missing. It's just, oh yeah, did you think of this minor thing?
Yeah, and sometimes you spend so much time looking over this search and working on it that you just can't see past it anymore. So there's occasionally some really obvious, like I've done one before and sent it to my colleague, and he came back and said, there must be a really obvious reason why you haven't put this in, but I just don't know what it is. And I was like, nope, there is no obvious reason. I just completely forgot it. But that is why we do it, the peer review process.
Yeah, perfect. So I think everybody's got the things
Great,
that
yeah.
we'd anticipated. That's brilliant. Yeah, lovely. Okay, should we go back to the presentation? So, okay, this is a little bit more about general publishing advice, not just for systematic review then, really. So it's really making sure that if someone else is interested in your research area, or your personal research, so you as a researcher, or your area of interest, that person would be able to find it. So consistency is really key in the presentation of your own name, your institutional name, and who you're working for, but also the title and abstract. So the keywords that you use within your work are clear, and they represent the work that you've been doing, rather than sometimes, and I'll give you an example in a second, of some pieces of work where they've tried to be clever or creative about the name of their work, and then sometimes they'll slip through the net in terms of being able to be found, or a recovery when somebody's searching for information on that area. Also, ensuring that people can get to your work, these three things will make it easier for them. okay, and also for you to promote your work. So an ORCID ID, if you're not familiar with ORCID, they're a unique identifier, a unique digital persistent identifier. So it always stays the same, it's unique to you, and it's a number, it's used by many institutions, publishers, resources all over the world. So it's got the advantage over smaller sort of publisher identifiers, like something like ResearchGate, say, for example. ORCID is a universal identifier, but it always stays the same, and it enables, so say for example, you might have a name or a name that just gets cited differently. So for example, I've got a colleague working in the university whose name's Samantha Holloway, and occasionally she gets referenced as Holloway S, occasionally Holloway Sam, occasionally Holloway Samantha, and then plus middle names as well. So it just saves, it's a really minor detail and something that often people don't think about, but having an ORCID ID will prevent any of that error from happening. The second thing in marketing your publication is really important is making sure that your publication is open access. And this is something that you want to be quite upfront if you're bidding for funding, to make sure that you've got those fees in your funding application, because it often does cost to publish in open access publications, or to make sure that your publication is published open access. So just make sure that that's what you want. It'll just make sure that people around the world from all countries of the world are able to access the information that you've published without a subscription to that journal article or journal. So hopefully it'll increase the visibility and also the engagement with your research. And then the use of a DOI. So a DOI is a digital object identifier. And like the ORCID, it's a unique identifier that always stays the same for that journal article, regardless of whichever publisher that article is with. And it's just really important when you're marketing your work that you use that DOI rather than just giving a hyperlink to the work or giving the title of your work, where people might just get lost then when they try and follow through to your work. If you give the DOI, it gives a permanent link for the address of that article. So it just makes sure that they can retrieve that work really easily. So I say use the DOI in promotion if you're going to use Twitter, or you've got professional social contacts, or you've put it up on a website or a blog, for example. If you use that DOI, it always remains the same. So that makes things easy.
I don't know if you want Marianne to talk about how that relates to your altmetric score as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, DOIs are pulled in. So altmetrics is a score that can be used against research and how visible it is and what the engagement with that piece of research has been. So it's not using traditional sort of methods of analysis of how that's being used. It's using more modern sort of engagement techniques. So how it's being talked about on Twitter, who's been talking about it on Twitter, whether it's being downloaded to reference management software, in news articles and things like that. So if you're using a DOI, that will help to make sure that the score on the altmetric is accurate. I don't know, is that covered, that delta, what you were thinking?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Somebody just raised a question, they just wanted us to repeat it. So I've linked it in the chat, that is altmetric.com, and like Marianne says, it pulls it finds the DOI online. So if it's been talked about, like Marianne said, on social media or policy documents on news websites, it kind of draws it all together to give you an altmetric scoring.
Okay, so on the next slide, I've just got a couple of examples of titles of journal articles. So there's a couple of questionable ones, and you think, okay, you give it to the authors. They might try to be creative or funny about their titles, and they thought, oh, the good and the bad, Swiss cheese model. But unless you know what the Swiss cheese model is, as a researcher or a librarian, you really wouldn't be able to find that article. We don't know what that's about. And then for the second one, the good, the bad and the ugly, who knows what that one's about? And then we've got a third there, coping with what, where, when, how, and so what. So you could really go to town with explaining exactly what these journal articles are and what they're subject specific about. So we've got an example of a good one as well, stress and coping among families of patients with traumatic brain injury, and it's a review of the literature. So they've said their methodology, they've said what the problems are, the stress and coping, and the patients have had traumatic brain injury. So they've been very specific in the language that they've used. It's informative, it's specific, and that means that when somebody's searching for that information, it makes it much more retrievable, and even at a glance, you're able to say, okay, these are the results that I'm going to find, and I'll know what the study design is. So always try to include those 4 points, really be informative and specific, make sure that the work is retrievable, and give a clue to what the results are and your study design that you're looking at as well. So this isn't just specific to publishing for systematic review, this is just good practice. Also, how do you select a journal then when you're looking at publishing? So depending on whether you've got funder requirements, so if you're in receipt of funding from a body, then you will need to comply first of all with what their requirements were. So if they're requiring open access, or if there's a period where it's behind a paywall but it becomes available after 3 months, to say, for example, you can check whether the journal publication process meets those funder requirements with these links that I've given. So Sherpa Fact will check that, the second one for you. But also the first one, Sherpa Romeo, just checks publishers' policies on copyright and self-archiving. So that can really help you identify whether the journal is going to meet your requirements for open access or for depositing it in an institutional repository. Here in Cardiff, we've got an institutional repository, and we require our researchers to deposit their work in that repository. So going onto this website will just enable you to see whether you can meet those requirements. So say, for example, if you're in an institution that's going to be returning for ref, this is really important. But increasingly, we think it's good practice to make sure that your work is open access so that everybody can get access to it, and it becomes more visible. So we think that quite potentially you get higher citations as a result of publishing in an open access journal. Okay. So we've got some helpful resources there at the end there. We can make these slides available to you, or you might want to just jot down these resources that we've put together. So the Cardiff University has got a specialist unit for research evidence, and they run a systematic review course. So if you want to find out more, you want to go through the methods and skills that are needed to do a systematic review, we kind of recommend that you check out that course. And there'll be information on their website about that. Also, commonly used in systematic reviews is a Prisma flow diagram for reporting your work. So we think that's a really good resource for you to use. And in addition, the CASP website, we often recommend to staff and students for its critical appraisal checklists. there are many checklists available on that website. So you need to choose the checklist that matches the methodology that you're going to be working on. So for example, if you're looking at qualitative information or your quantitative information, then you choose the appropriate checklist. But they're really handy when you're doing a review. And then also the Cochrane Handbook has got, the Cochrane website has got a handbook for doing systematic reviews of intervention. So you can see how they've built up their best practice and hints and tips on the procedure that they go through for conducting systematic reviews. And like we said, they're gold standard really. So, you know, you might look to them for inspiration and kind of to look for best practice. And then Prospero is the, I don't know if you'd call it a database, Delyth, would you, of
protocols.
Protocols, that's it. Database of protocols. So you can use that to search for the protocols that have already been done and systematic reviews that are in the pipeline, or as Delyth was talking about, you can submit your own protocol there as well, and it just makes sure that you've got a standard that you're going to be holding yourself to account to, and it'll allow you to sort of have parameters for your review so that you don't get sidetracked and, you know, the wool doesn't unwind, basically.
And I think we intended on linking there to Marla's talk from last year about just systematic reviewing in general, which, yeah, I thought we had, but we obviously haven't. So I don't know if Jess or Claire, you've probably got the link to that. I don't know whether you could share that afterwards in case people are interested in seeing that as well. That would probably be useful.
Okay, and I think that's us done. So if there are any questions that anybody's got.
Thank you so much, Delyth and Marianne, for such a comprehensive and interesting presentation. We've had some really good engagement as well, so that's great. We have had a few questions come in, so if I just fire through those. What are the updates in the PRISMA 2020 guidelines that we should keep in mind while trying to publish an SR?
I haven't studied them, but I know that one of the changes is now the recommendation is to publish all of your searches, not just one of your searches. So I believe it used to be one of your searches and then you could just say, and we replicated this in these other databases, whereas now the new kind of suggestion or gold standard is to publish all of them. That's the only thing off the top of my head that I know has come up in there. Oh, thank you, Claire, for sharing the YouTube link there. Yeah, we're kind of flat out at the moment, so I haven't had time to study that in great amounts of detail. But yeah.
Okay, which is the recommended resource for new researchers?
Oh, what type of, I guess, what type of resource would be my question? Kind of
a bit more information on that
one. Okay, yeah, Syed, perhaps if you can put a little bit more information in the chat, and then we can come back to that one. Another question, thoughts on using, now excuse me if I don't get the acronym correct, Scopus as a database? I've had mixed reviews from librarians regarding using Scopus.
That's interesting. Yeah, we'd always suggest doing it, especially if obviously it's a social science database. So it is one that we regularly recommend. It is not the easiest to search. Certainly doesn't have the same kind of functionality as something like, well, Medline or any of the Ovid databases. But yeah, we do recommend it quite a bit.
It's one that we commonly use. Normally, I think we'd say to use it as a supplementary database, especially in medicine, but sometimes Scopus might be the main one that you were using if your research area was slightly off health outcomes or health. Yeah.
Okay, and one final question, when should you rerun the search?
So you have to obviously give yourself enough time that if you rerun it and find papers that are relevant, that you've got enough time to add that into the review that you've done. So if you've done some kind of thematic analysis, you might be able to quite easily write that in. If you've done a meta-analysis and you've got statisticians helping you, you might have to think in a bit more detail about when you're going to do that. 2 months? 2 months before you think you're going to finish, maybe, so that you build in enough time that if you find anything, you've got the time to add it into your review before you kind of send it off publication.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for such a great presentation, and thanks everyone for attending and for all your really interesting questions. As Marianne and I think also Delyth mentioned, we are recording this session. It'll be available on our YouTube page afterwards. We've also shared the link from the session last year as well, if that's helpful for anyone. And we will be sending an email straight after this session. So if you are interested in undertaking the systematic reviews course, you can join our registered interest list for that. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.